Hi, my name's Ash.
And I'm Callie.
And welcome to Paved with Gold, the eating disorder recovery podcast. I would like to acknowledge the traditional landowners on which Callie and I are recording and extend the same respect to the traditional custodians of the lands from which you are all listening. On this podcast, we are always saying to people, if you are worried that you're developing an eating disorder or disordered eating, please seek help as soon as you can. And our advice has not and won't shift from that. But what happens when seeking that medical help is scary, confronting, unhelpful, pointless, or in the worst case, dangerous? Unfortunately for fat people and people in marginalized identities, this is an all too common occurrence, and the amount of weight bias and discrimination in medicine is frightening, especially in an industry that is supposed to keep us healthy and safe, and you're supposed to trust these medical professionals. Thankfully, there are people like our next guest who are here to call this shit out, provide guidance for those navigating the health system as a fat person, and be an educator for clinicians. They are a weight-inclusive GP, fat activist, and expert in weight stigma. They're also the founder of the #NoWeigh campaign, Weigh spelled W-E-I-G-H. Yes, I can spell, which aims to end medical weight stigma. And then, of course, the ever reputable and factual Daily Mail even suggested that they are the most outrageous GP in Britain, ?
That needs to be on a T-shirt, but anyway.
I know. So we know that we're in great company already. But they are more commonly known as the Fat Doctor on Instagram. I am personally just so obsessed with this person. So please excuse my fangirlness from now until forever. Welcome to the pod, Dr. Asher Larmie. I am so excited. Oh my God.
Thank you. Although I think the Britain's most outrageous doctor, I'm thinking about changing my Instagram handle to Britain's most outrageous doctor. I love it.
You're doing something right if you're pissing off Daily Mail, honestly.
I was going to say, like, Daily Mail, a very prestigious news outlet that is very trustworthy.
Exactly. The thing that upsets me the most about it is the question mark at the end. There should have been an exclamation mark. I think that would have been better.
Thank you very much.
Exactly. Don't take that away. Don't hand it to me and then try and take it away at the same time. Like either I am or I'm not. Don't question it. And I wanted to thank you right off the bat for putting that out there, because I think that frames, I think, the rest of this conversation is that I am a fairly outrageous doctor, and I'm outrageous because I have the audacity to call other doctors into question. And, that is outrageous, and I'm all good with that. I mean, I had the best compliment the other day. It was really one of the most wonderful compliments. It was actually from someone who is in eating disorder recovery, isn't fat, but is, I guess, interested in eating disorder recovery. And she said something along the lines of, I found out about you because from a YouTube video that is about you. So a kind of like what my opinion on the fat doctor. And she said, I was referred to as the most dangerous doctor in the world. And she wrote to me, she said, that's why I'm following you. I mean, you've got to be doing something right. Keep up with the disruption. And I said back to her, best compliment I've ever received. Literally, these people who kind of call into question whether or not I'm dangerous. I think perhaps they think that that's, somehow going to upset me. It has quite the opposite effect. It makes me so proud because I am a disruptor.
So we know a lot about you. However, for anyone...
That sounds so creepy.
It does, but you know what? I'm not even going to apologize for it. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, how you entered this space and how you became the iconic fat doctor?
Iconic seems to... I mean, you're reaching now. Like that's
icon.
I'm infamous.
We're standing by it.
Before we started this podcast, I told you it was just going to be aggressive complimenting pretty much like a large portion of the time. So I gave you fair warning.
You did. Sorry, not sorry. Gotcha. So I mean, like I've been fat for most of my adult life. Not most of it, all of my adult life. And I've been a doctor since 2003, and I was very much indoctrinated into the very kind of weight normative, being fat is bad for your health, losing weight is good for your health, approach to medicine from day one. And that's partly because of the world that we live in, and partly because of the training that I had. And I was very much on that path until 2020. And several things happened in 2020. One is something that we all experienced, which was the COVID pandemic, but I also happened to turn 40.
What?
Yeah, I turned 40. I know. I turned 40 May 2020. Can you believe it?
Oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah. I turned. I don't know. I wasn't that bothered. To be honest, I was too busy working to really care. But it was around the time that everyone was talking about how fat people were more likely to be dying from COVID, and I was literally working in a COVID clinic. That was my job day to day. So it was quite terrifying. So I did what any reasonable person would do, the week they turn 40 and find out that they might possibly be dying in the next couple of weeks because they're too fat. I went on a diet, and I went on just a standard calorie controlled diet, nothing exciting, calorie deficit, eat less, exercise more kind of thing, and successfully lost weight. I've done that. It's that simple. I've done that plenty of times, and I'm always successful. I've always managed to lose the weight. I just hit a plateau, as you do every single time.
So sustainable.
I know. But the problem is, for me, every time that happens, it has a massive knock-on effect on my mental health. And a lot of things were happening at the time. It wasn't just dieting this time. It was dieting and COVID, and other things were happening at the same time. So I became very depressed, and I got to a point where I was just, having very intrusive thoughts, very, suicidal ideation, it was really difficult. And I just thought, I can't keep doing this to myself. I do this far too often. This can't be right. This can't be healthy. And this is when I started looking into, when I first came across anti-diet cult. I didn't even know what it was. I'd never heard of anyone saying, oh, by the way, did you know diets don't work? No one's ever said that to me before. And so the first time I heard it, I was like, of course they do. And after the 10th time, I thought, maybe they don't. And it went from anti-diet to intuitive eating. I went on an intuitive eating course, followed by starting to learn a little bit about weight stigma, medical weight stigma. And from there until today, I have gone on I would say, I'm right at the beginning of the journey, to be fair. There is plenty more to be learning. And, there I stand in the footsteps of people who have come before me, have been doing this for literally decades. And I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm right here at the beginning. They've done all the hard work. I'm just kind of able to sort of absorb all of it and, very specifically apply it to doctoring and being a doctor, which is what I do.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I found you in particular so fascinating. So I come from a medical family. My mum was a physiotherapist, went to medical school. My dad is a professor of medicine. So I grew up very much, I think, with the same sort of rhetoric that I think you sort of studied in, right? Of being fat is bad for you because you're a medical risk and all of those kind of things. And then having you being able to sort of read all of the research that is there and understand it from a medical point of view, I think is so incredibly, it gives you so much authority to speak on it. And for me, I think I just want to sort of clone you and have like a million of you, because I think there is the work that you're doing is so important. And I think yes, you may be Britain's most outrageous doctor, but you're also a doctor, a healthcare professional who can actually interpret a lot of the studies that we see and hear about that occur behind the PR spin. Because I think people read the press release of a research paper and they're like, oh, yep, cool, cliff notes, and I'm going to take it from there. And that's where we get all of this ridiculous rhetoric around, I
read this one thing, I'm going to run with it.
Exactly. And yeah, that's, I think, what I've really, really loved about hearing your opinion on all of this and hearing you speak so eloquently and just sort of, oh yeah, this research, it's trash. It's funded by this person. And it actually means nothing. So if you're comfortable, I would love to hear if you can tell us a little bit about your personal experience with the medical field, personally and professionally, as a person who holds multiple marginalized identities. You can obviously speak to it professionally, but also I know that you have been vocal before about your personal experience. So if you could share that with us, if you're comfortable with that.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I think sometimes people think I'm being too harsh on doctors, and in the same way that a lot of, I don't know, feminists, who call out the systems and structures that are clearly, responsible for the oppression of women, for centuries. And, we talk about the patriarchy. And as a result of talking about the patriarchy, some people get offended and say, well, not all men. And of course, not all men. And in the same way, of course, not all doctors. I'm very aware that there are some lovely doctors out there who genuinely care about their patients and genuinely want to do what is in the best interest of their patients. And sometimes it's the systems that are in place that are stopping them from doing what is in their patient's best interest. And sometimes it's just ignorance, and it's not their fault that they're ignorant, because like I said, we are indoctrinated. It is literal brainwashing, and the brainwashing starts when you're a child. It doesn't start in medical school. It's just affirmed when you get into the medical profession. But you were brainwashed way before you entered medical school. And we know this because we see studies of medical students and we see their anti-fat bias even in their first year of medical school. It can only get worse. It doesn't get better. So I think when I talk about my profession, I talk about two things. First, the systems and the structures that are in place that are deliberately there to oppress all kinds of marginalized identities, actually. But when we're talking about weight, the body mass index, for example, never was intended to be an individual assessment. It is an absolutely inaccurate and inappropriate method of assessing anyone's cardiometabolic health or any form of health, any way you want to describe health. And yet we use it all the time.
Don't worry, that question is coming.
Okay, well, I won't go too much into it. But body mass index is used to gatekeep certain services for certain people, right? For people with higher weight individuals, and so these are the systems that are in place. But you've also got a cope group, and I'm going to be honest, of people who went into medicine for a variety of reasons. Some were for the prestige and the status. That's not a good reason to get into medicine. Some were because they were following in the footsteps of parents. Again, not a great reason to get into medicine. Medicine is it's one of these sort of weird professions that has so much status in the world. But actually, if you think about it, it's an apprenticeship. It is an apprenticeship. I study a bit of science, and then I follow a whole bunch of doctors, and I learn from what they're doing. So if they're doing bad things, I will end up doing bad things. And that's the problem. The culture of medicine is so toxic. And my
cycle, isn't it?
It's a cycle, and it never goes away, because my seniors teach me how to practice medicine. And then I teach my juniors the same way of practicing medicine, and it hasn't changed. We're supposed to care about, our patients' autonomy. We're supposed to do no harm. We're supposed to care about justice. We're supposed to never discriminate. All of these things that are very much written into our medical ethics. Yet we do the exact opposite, but we've been doing the exact opposite since the first day we got onto a ward and followed a doctor around on a ward round. And so, unfortunately, they're not the best of people in general. And there are many people that I come into contact with from a professional point of view and just think, I wouldn't let you go anywhere near me. And yet you are charged with looking after patients. So I have been in meetings. I have sat, eating lunch with people who have said the most outrageous, ableist, especially ableist. My goodness, the ableism in medicine is quite horrendous. Fatphobic, transphobic, homophobic, racist, and racism again. I mean, the problem of racism in medicine. I can remember just it being so normalized that I couldn't quite believe it when I first came across it. I was like, but this can't be happening. And I'm looking around me thinking, surely nobody else. I must be seeing things. This can't be reality. I've sat in meetings where, the General Medical Council, who's in charge of all doctors in the UK, came and did a talk about racism within medicine and said, we've done an investigation and we agree that there is a racism problem in medicine. To which I think a lot of us were like, no shit, Sherlock, of course there is. And yet I sat there and I was listening to him going on, and at the end of the conversation, I put my hand up and went, I'm sorry, I've heard you say there's a problem, but I haven't heard you speak to what the solution is. And the waffle that I got in, I was just like, no one's seeing this? Am I the only one who's seeing this? I'm in a room full of black and brown doctors, by the way. I'm not the only, I'm one of the only, well, not the only white faces, but here I am turning around looking at them going, but they can't speak up. They know they can't speak up. They've been told not to speak up. Every time they do speak up, they get in trouble. And all the other doctors around are just sort of accepting it. So I work in a toxic culture. It is so toxic that I cannot bring myself to work in that environment anymore because it's too upsetting and oppressive for me.
Look, I think I've had 3 clients today that I've spoken to who we've had a conversation around their general practitioner. Basically just, I don't want to see them because of another conversation, we need medical, stability. I don't want to go to the hospital because this is what's going to happen. And, it's experience, that's lived experience that they have had, especially, my clients that do hold, multiple marginalized identities, they go to the hospital and they are treated like they are trash. And of course they don't want to go to the hospital. That's meant to be the place they can go to, if something is medically wrong and they go there and they get treated like that. Of course they don't want to go.
The more I talk to people, the more I realize there aren't that many people that do feel safe going to a hospital. I used to think it was this particular group, and then you meet another group and you meet another group. And, every time I talk to somebody about their experience of hospital, and of course, I am aware of the fact that I hear oftentimes the bad stories, right? And that I'm conscious of the fact that as a result of that could make me biased. But in this case, one bad story is one bad story too many. It's not like there's 2 sides of the story. A hospital should be a safe place. There are absolutely, without question, rules and regulations in play that prevent racism, any form of discrimination, ableism. So if it's happening, even if it happened once, it doesn't matter how many times it's happening, even if it's happening once, that is one too many. So of course,
and especially if there's like a chorus of people saying it, maybe, like, not saying it's all bad, but if there's a chorus of people saying it, maybe we should look into it.
I think that's what we need to begin to realize, is that just one story too many. I know personally of, I'm trying to think how many it is now, 7 now cases of people whose cancer was missed because of weight bias. That's 7 cancers now that I have heard their personal stories. They have told me the way they presented, and I have said without a shadow of a doubt, as your GP, I would have made that diagnosis at this stage. I know what I would have done. I'm very confident to say that in this situation, any GP should have gone, this is a problem. And it was missed. And there have been ones that were surprising, and there were ones that were blatantly obvious. And you just think, this person has now got, a palliative diagnosis, has now got, there's no hope of treatment because of fat phobia. And as far as I'm concerned, even if it was one case, not 7, that is an absolutely horrifying statistic.
This is one of the questions that I did want to ask you, of like, what are the harms that medical bias causes?
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I've recently finished reading Aubrey Gordon's book, You Just Need to Lose Weight, and 19 Other Myths About Fat People. And in there, she talks about people who have died of, because cancers have been missed, and doctors who actually don't physically want to touch their patients to examine them. And I mean, the same book, Aubrey has said that she's never seen a specialist in her life, which to me, as a very, straight-sized, privileged white person, I could not even imagine that, because I've seen so many specialists in my life, and I'd go to my GP and I say, oh, I've got this. They examine me and they say, cool, we're going to send you for this test and we're going to send you for a scan and be on your way, and then we'll figure it out from there. And that keeps me safe. And I'm like, cool, my doctor, I trust my doctor. The fact that that is not a standard thing for everybody, regardless of what they look like, who they are, what abilities they have, it's wrong. It's just point blank. It should not happen. But unfortunately it does.
There are many ways that weight bias impacts, or any form of bias and discrimination impacts individuals, and it works from both sides. So one half of the problem is the way that doctors treat their patients, and the other half of the problem is the way that patients can't trust their doctors. So doctors mistreat their patients by ignoring their symptoms, by refusing to examine or examine their patients. So there are studies that show that doctors just don't like examining fat patients, especially when it comes to important examinations like pelvic exams and breast exams. There are studies that show that doctors are far less likely to medically treat fat patients compared to thin patients. There's often the situation where doctors will send patients away with just weight loss advice. I'm not talking about like you went to see your doctor because you've got a sore thumb and they told you to lose weight. I'm talking about I've got high blood pressure, go away and lose some weight. There's no evidence that will improve your blood pressure, and yet that's what people are being told. So in these cases, doctors are actively causing harm by mismanaging or misdiagnosing or failing to diagnose medical conditions or failing to treat them properly. So that's one way that harm is perpetuated. But the other way is that when you're being stigmatized, and of course, it doesn't have to be as serious as missing a cancer. Like these are the hugely kind of like scary moments. But it's just the simple things. It is the things like I went to see my doctor about something, and they brought up my weight when I didn't consent to having this conversation. It was brought up without my consent. Or
like I have a headache. Oh,
yeah.
Well, lose weight. It's like, that's not what I asked.
No, it's nothing to do with why I'm here. And also this is very intrusive. You're speaking to a partner without even asking whether it's okay to discuss it, because I didn't come here for this. I came here for a discussion about my headache. And
I'm sure they were terrified of that as well, because I'm sure that's happened 10,000 times before. Mm-hmm. And so they probably geared themselves up for that.
Right. And so that's what I mean. So I mean, this kind of intrusive kind of weight loss, pushing of weight loss, and also all of the other stigmatizing, a lot of it is nonverbal, and it's things that we pick up on because communication, 70% of communication is nonverbal, right? So we're picking up on these things. But then that stigma doesn't just impact us in the moment. In the moment, what that does is it means that we're less likely to be able to communicate effectively. We don't hear as much, so we don't retain as much information. So that in of itself is problematic. But once you've had that experience, it puts you off the next one, and it puts you off the next one, and it puts you into a heightened state of stress, hypervigilance, anxiety. We all
know what symptoms stress and anxiety do to the body, right?
It's
right?
Trauma.
It's trauma. And when we talk about trauma, I'll often, when I'm running courses on this, I will often talk about the 5 F's of the trauma response. We always talk about fight and flight, but it's fight, flight, it's freeze, it's flop, and it's fawn. And a lot of people are in the flop stage where they just go, they're not going to care, they're not going to help me, it's not going to make a difference, so why would I bother? And that kind of sense of defeat, that sense of what's the point, I can't be bothered to go anymore, and or just I'm terrified and therefore I will avoid that doctor because I don't want to go through the pain. There are studies that show that people are very concerned about their health and yet will actively avoid the doctor because of, and then they list all of the different reasons. And the other thing you have to remember is that you don't even have to have personal experience of this, because stigma can also be, stereotype. It can be, it could be something that the threat of stigma. If you know that you belong to a group that is being stigmatized by doctors, then you don't have to have even experienced it yourself to experience all of the trauma surrounding that. So it's really problematic. And I can't state this enough. Stigma has no place in medicine. It's very, very, very black and white, written into our code of conduct. You do not stigmatize your patients, full stop. There is no
do no
question.
Harm, right?
I mean, but even everyone always says do no harm. And yes, do no harm is very important, but also justice and fairness, treating people equally, not discriminating. It is written into your medical code of conduct. In Australia, in the UK, any country you work in, there will be something written in some formal document that says you do not discriminate, you do not stigmatize patients. So there is no excuse, none.
So my next question then is, where do you think this bias comes from? I know that, obviously we're indoctrinated from jump, from life inception.
Yeah.
And obviously diet culture, we live in a cesspool of it. But you go into medical school, there's all this research, and yet people still come out with the same talking points of, oh, well, high cholesterol and high blood pressures because someone's fat, or if you are fat, you're going to have diabetes.
It's always the white gym bro on Instagram that's throwing that out at you when you're trying to,
I'm just concerned about your health. No, you're not.
They're always very concerned about my health, and they always say good luck with my diabetes. And I'm always like, well, thanks. I mean, I don't have another diabetic review for another, because I do have diabetes. I am that fat person with type 2 diabetes. I feared it for so long. I got gestational diabetes in my first pregnancy when I was 25. I'm 43. And so, I mean, I was insulin resistant then. I wasn't even that fat then. I've become fatter as time has gone on. So I don't even think I met the criteria for, I don't remember my BMI at that time, but probably when I was 25, I probably wasn't even quote unquote in the O category, right? Like I've gotten fatter as time goes on. Maybe I was in the O, but I wasn't as fat as I am now. So what is really interesting to me is I always knew I was going to get diabetes. Like I had 3 gestational diabetes pregnancies. It's very high on my family's, it's genetically, it's likely. And I have been chronically dieting for 20 years. And I have read the studies, and they make it very clear that if you chronically diet and you weight cycle, you're making your insulin resistance worse. There is a study that came out this year that was really quite, I can't remember the exact wording now, I'm going to butcher it, but something along the lines of that the consequence of weight recycling, the metabolic consequence of weight recycling are so much more severe than any short-term benefits you get from dieting. And so, diabetes was inevitable for me. And I've read the data. I know exactly what it says. I am very familiar with, for example, the diabetes prevention program, which literally looked at, can we prevent diabetes? It's in the name. I've studied those statistics. What, the question you asked is why does this happen? And I think the answer to that question is who benefits from it? Because it's not people, it's not patients. And I'm not convinced it's doctors, not most doctors, certainly not GPs. I mean, perhaps now more so because we're getting paid to push weight loss. But until recently, GPs were relatively kind of on the fence. Like, actually, I don't particularly want to have this weight loss conversation because it's awkward, and I don't want to have the awkward conversation. I'd rather ignore it. Thank you very much. And so that's how most of us practice, is just like, let's just ignore the elephant in the room. Some get off on that. And let's be honest, some doctors just genuinely enjoy it. It's the power dynamic. Like, I get it. And, for some people, there are some really, truly sort of potent fat phobic beliefs that just, make themselves known. They say the quiet part out loud on a daily basis for some doctors. And for some doctors, it's just a bit like, I'd rather just ignore this if I can, really. I just like to just pretend it's not happening. That's changed. So certainly when I first qualified compared to now, that's changed. And so you have to ask yourself, well, who is benefiting from this? And the answer is obvious. It is by far the most part Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, who are the 2 companies that have brought out these new weight loss injections over the last couple of years. This has been going on in the background for a very long time. They are the ones that are financially profiting. Novo Nordisk now has a higher, is worth more than the country of Denmark, which is where it's based.
My God.
It's worth significantly more than the country of Denmark. The country of Denmark has had to cap the amount of their profit margin because of how wealthy it is. It is more powerful than a European country. That's how rich it is. That's how much. So never underestimate that. But there's also, weight loss companies. There's also, now it's not even called weight loss companies, weight management companies. It doesn't matter. All of
wellness companies. Wellness.
And then there's the food industry, there's the diet industry. As you said, it's the gym bros there are lots of people profiting from this. And so when you ask, the question, why is it like this? I always say, follow the money. Just figure out who's earning the money and you will know. I'm not earning any money. You're welcome to take a look at my taxes. I am not making money from this message.
I am not doing this.
This is not a money thing for me. But, for sure, a lot of the gym bros that have a massive go at me, their whole, their bottom line depends on the fact that they can tell people to prevent diabetes, follow my program. But what you have to understand is also doctors and all healthcare professionals really, aside from the ones that are specifically trained in nutrition or exercise. I mean, you in Australia have these amazing people called exercise physiologists.
They're incredible.
Yeah, they're amazing. but like they are, I mean, it's wonderful. You have got these people, they exist and they're wonderful, but they're few and far between. And the vast majority of healthcare professionals, especially doctors and nurses, have zero or like 1 week worth of nutrition training and exercise. I mean, this is a huge field, right? Like there are people who specialize in this industry who have done, you know, not just undergraduate degrees, but masters and PhDs even in this specific area. A doctor will have a week's worth, if that. I didn't get any nutritional training. And so actually a lot of us are informed by what we're reading or watching or listening to on social media. I mean, it is that bad. And some of us have even got into the habit of saying, well, have you tried this diet because it worked for me, or it worked for my mum, or it worked for my brother? You know, like we're literally bringing our own anecdotal lived experience into the consultation room. It is the most unethical way to practice medicine. I mean, it's shocking to me that we do this, but it's so common. Ask anyone. Like people will tell you, oh yeah, my doctor always says that. I mean, it's insanity.
Yeah. I think while we're still sort of circling this sort of area, I think, and bring it back to eating disorders, which, let's be honest, is why we're here. What harm does this sort of weight stigma cause when people to present to their medical team in the context of eating disorders? Because I know, and I'm probably going to get this statistic wrong, I think 9% of eating disorders are only include people who are
6%.
Sorry, my bad, 6%.
Yeah.
Of people who present quote unquote underweight or, you know, quite extremely thin and sort of dangerously thin. So I think we kind of know what kind of harm this can do, but can you eloquently tell us into your microphone?
Yeah, and I think that the statistic that 6% of people are underweight and the rest aren't is really important for us to understand and to hold on to. But actually, I don't think it really matters what size you are.
Oh, totally.
No. I know you know this, but actually, the way that we practice medicine is harmful for everybody, because it doesn't matter what size you are now. If you're trying to get into eating, if you're trying to recover from an eating disorder, you have no idea what kind of a body you're going to recover into, right? And if the fear of recovering into a body that will eventually become fat is there because that is what your doctor is, you know, your doctor wants you to recover into a quote unquote healthy sized body. Like, so it doesn't matter who you are or where you are. It actually is very dangerous to hold these beliefs. If we genuinely believe that there is only one way to be healthy or one size to be healthy, then we are harming everybody. And I cannot stress this enough. This, you know, and one of the things that I've noticed actually is when I talk to people in eating disorder recovery, like yourselves and people who are just talking about this, do podcasts and stuff, we are all singing from the same hymn sheet, right? We're all saying this kind of attitude towards bodies in general. I sometimes call it body fascism. You know, it's a like, this is the way your body should be, and anything outside of that is not good enough. That's dangerous for everybody. I think, of course, we are missing eating disorders. So we'll often just assume, well, if you're not thin, you don't have an eating disorder, which of course we know is nonsense. We are I have a lot of problems with the definition of binge eating disorder and the fact that people do not believe that it is a restrictive eating disorder. I think that's nonsense.
Oh, you and I both.
Yeah, I think we could probably pontificate on this for at least 3 or 4 hours. That I think is problematic. So I think even the definitions of eating disorders are problematic. And I think also the management. I mean, I hear people all the time saying, like, my doctor is encouraging weight loss and I have an eating disorder. And they're encouraging weight loss to treat my eating disorder. And I'm just like, but
literally,
like, you can't.
What are you saying to me? Like, this is just, it is like absolutely dangerous and harmful to its core. Like, it is just
to its core. And one of the things is we don't have access. I mean, in the UK, there is no eating disorder recovery for anybody over a certain BMI. And by certain BMI, I'm not even talking about BMI within the quote unquote normal range. You have to be at a very low BMI, as in a BMI that is probably going to not be compatible with life for much longer in order to even get a spot in a hospital or into a facility. So again, provision wise, we're not making provisions. We're not doing anything. We're under the false assumption that restriction only damages thin bodies. which again is nonsense. There are so many people that end up in hospital with heart failure, with kidney failure, because they were big, but they were restricting, and their doctors didn't think that was a problem. In fact, we are telling people nowadays, including myself, I was advised to go on an 800 calorie diet. And I said to but for my diabetes, and I said to the nurse who recommended, I said, look, if I was smaller and I told you I was only having 800 calories a day, you should be sitting there thinking, this is a problem. This is an eating disorder. You've just prescribed me a diet that you would consider problematic in anyone that was smaller than me. And these kind of things are all massively dangerous. It's I often think about similar things, report this to the police. I've often been told, when something happens, when I experience transphobia, report to the police. And my response is always, what do you think is going to happen? I'll report it to the police and they'll tell me they're going to take it very seriously and nothing will happen. And sometimes, if I'm unlucky, the process of reporting it to the police will be more painful and more traumatizing than just the thing that happened. And I think
or more dangerous.
Yeah, more dangerous. And I think the system of itself, like you alluded to at the beginning, we want to tell people seek medical help. Of course, we want to tell people that. I want to tell people that. But at the same time, I'm very conscious that sometimes seeking medical help is going to make you worse. If you walk out of that interview that you've described and you think, well, that's it, I'm never going to seek medical help again. That is, is it any wonder that eating disorders unfortunately have the highest, rates of mortality out of all their mental health conditions as described in the DSM-5? To me, it is not surprising when we look at those statistics. A lot of those statistics, unfortunately, are people unaliving themselves. And that, who's to blame for that? Like, actually, and I say we collectively, the medical profession, have to be held accountable for people unaliving themselves because of the treatment they've received within the system. So, I hope that's not too traumatic for people who are listening, but, we have a responsibility because this is the problem. And even if you don't take the steps to unalive yourself, but you're in a place where you're really depressed, I will always say to people when they talk about health, my first question to them is always, cool, please define health, your definition of health. I'd like to know what you mean by health, because I am yet to find a universal definition of health, and everybody I ask will have a slightly different definition of health. But most people I ask, once, especially when I kind of tease it out of them, will admit that health is way more than just physical. It's also not just the absence of disease. It's psychological, it's mental, it's emotional, it's social, it's environmental, it's financial. There's so many aspects to health. And so if your physical treatment is actually having more of an impact on your mental health than it is on your physical health, then we're causing more harm than we are good. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So a lot of the advice we give out to our patients, even if we think it's in their best interest, even if we're like, oh, you could stand to lose a few pounds, if that's going to cause your mental health to deteriorate much more than it does, cause any, I don't believe there are any real serious impacts on your physical health, but even if there were, supposedly there were impacts on your physical health. If your mental health is worth, like me, my own personal lived experience, I dropped my weight. Supposedly that reduced my risk of COVID. Turns out I didn't, but at the time I thought it did. But then I was having my mental health was in tatters, and I wasn't fit for practice. I wasn't healthy in my job. I wasn't safe for my patients. I wasn't a good parent. I wasn't. So was I healthy? I'm not sure I was, actually. I think I was in really bad health.
But you're smaller.
But I'm smaller. I was smaller.
Yeah. Now, we have said many times on this podcast that the BMI is absolute trash. And again, we will not waver from that opinion. However, I know that we've said it a lot. However, we have never really unpacked why. And I'm sure you can absolutely go and listen to things like maintenance phase and read research and articles about it. However, we personally have been waiting for someone who is far more informed to unpack it than we are. So
well, we can't just say BMI is trash and leave it at that.
I mean, we can and we have.
I was going to say, feel free.
Can you please tell us what the BMI is for those people who don't know? Although I'm pretty sure most people who are listening to this will have a very in-depth knowledge of what it is. But more importantly, why it's terrible and why it does so much harm in the medical community, especially in the case of eating disorders, which I know we sort of touched on. But Yes.
Yeah.
Please unload and unleash hell.
And I think
I love that.
the BMI in itself is useless, but it is actually more what it represents. And I think to answer your question, there's two things I need to do. One is take you through the history, not just of the BMI, but how the BMI is used today. So that's the first thing I'll do. And the second thing I'll do is I'll talk to you about why it's harmful and why replacing it with something else is not going to make a damn bit of difference. So to begin with, we probably all know Adolphe Quetelet, who was a Belgian, influencer. So he had his fingers in a lot of pies. Statistician, but I'm also I'm also this and I'm also that, and I'm a poet. And he was the OG influencer, like that guy on YouTube.
Kylie Jenner had nothing on
Right.
Quetelet.
Right.
Stop
That's
it, oh my
great.
God.
That's a great way to put it. And it was the Kylie Jenner of his time. Also a eugenicist. Just put that in there.
Just as a side thing.
Just thought that white people were superior in every way. That's fine. We'll put that to one side. He had an idea about the perfect man, the perfect man he believed was the average man. So this in of itself is problematic because the average man is not the perfect man. He's just the average man. And I'm using man because he wasn't interested in women.
Don't trust it. Yeah, we don't touch women. Don't
Women,
be ridiculous.
anybody.
They cannot be perfect.
There's just the average man. Yeah. So this was a theory, and actually it's a theory that went out of favor because most people were just a bit like, oh, it was great at the time, and this was in the mid-19th century, mid-1800s. Went out of theory, nobody really paid much attention to it. And then we have to understand what happened afterwards. So in the beginning of the 1900s, a company called the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company was using these height and weight tables that were devised by a man named Lewis Dublin. We always mention Quetelet, but we never mention Dublin. He's just as bad. He was one of the pioneers of the public health profession that we know today, but he also worked for the life insurance company. And he has been praised. He was praised at the time and continues to be praised as bringing together insurance companies and public health. That's a good thing. It's not a good thing. It's one of the worst things possible. Yeah.
It's his fault.
Zero conflict of interest there.
Slight conflict of interest. Even in his eulogy, people praised him for it. And I'm just like, have you people lost your damn mind? Anyway, Lewis Dublin, don't forget his name. He is just as bad. He and his team devised the value of man, and the value of a man involved their weight and their height. So here we have Quetelet, who said that the average man was the perfect man, and then we have Dublin, who said this is how much a man's life is worth in terms of insurance. Right? This is the value of a man. And then Ansel Keys came along, and Ansel Keys, a physiologist.
Yeah.
We all love him. We all talk about him.
Old friend of the pod.
We all know where Ansel came from, and we all know that he hated fat people. And we all know that he came up with a measurement that he called the body mass index, and he used the Quetelet, he used Quetelet's ideas to create this index. And he said at the time, look, it's as good as the rest of them. None of them are great, but we'll use this one. And he also said this can be used for population studies, but it should not be used for individual assessment. He made that very clear when he published this particular paper. And yet, about 10 years later, an organization, I believe it was something to do with dietetics and nutrition, an organization in the States anyway, came along and said, what we're going to do is we're going to take these height weight tables, which are very difficult to read, and we're just going to convert them into BMI. So he said, not for individual assessment. 10 years later, in 85, what we'll do is we'll use the BMI for individual assessment. Some experts came along. So that became problematic. And then it didn't stop there. The National Institute for Health and then later on the World Health Organization decided that knowing someone's BMI is not enough. We need to say which is good and which is bad. We need to categorize, right? We need an us and them. We need a good, bad, very bad, extremely bad. So they came up with these levels, which even they agreed were just kind of using arbitrary measurements. They didn't really have much science behind it. So they just kind of went 25, not like 23.7 or 27. Picked a number, 25, and it's a good number because it's easy to remember. 25, 30, 40, done. Easy, piece of cake. This has been used from that day onwards and far before that, actually. We have been using this in all of our medical research. So we cannot understand weight outside of BMI categories, because we always use BMI to quantify, to qualify as, it's how we do our medical research. But beyond that, I mean, that in of itself is problematic because, for example, it limits the amount of people in a study. They'll often have a top limit, BMI of 40 or less, BMI of 35 or less. So they don't measure very fat people because they're excluded from the studies. Same for people who've got a BMI of under 20 or under 18, also not included in the studies. So already we're excluding certain people who are kind of on either end of the spectrum. And then, more importantly, we're using this to now individually assess people and to draw conclusions that we have no business drawing. For example, if you have a BMI over X, Y, and Z, you are going to be cardiometabolically less healthy. That's an assumption that everybody makes. And when I say cardiometabolically, I'm talking about insulin resistance, blood pressure, cholesterol, all of that stuff. Well, the studies are very clear. 50% of people who have an abnormally high BMI will have normal cardiometabolic health. And here's the kicker, 30% of people who have a normal BMI will be cardiometabolically unhealthy. So these people are being missed as well. They're not getting the treatment that they deserve because they're being told you're healthy when you're not. So it is a completely inaccurate measurement of health. It doesn't help anyone, but it is also used, and that's why you can't replace it. Because you could say, all right, BMI is terrible, doesn't work. Let's find a more accurate thing. It doesn't matter. You'll always be using something to define whether a person is healthy or not based on their weight. And there is no evidence that being fat is good for your quote unquote health. There is no, even if you want to be specific, like being fat, for example, is bad for insulin resistance, right? We could be very specific and just focus on insulin resistance. Even then, there are no studies that support that because none of the studies will ever consider things like weight stigma, weight cycling. They don't consider all sorts of really important things, genetics, mental health, chronic inflammation, all of these things are not factored into the equation. So there is no evidence. So there's no point in replacing the BMI with anything else. We also know, we know that to sum up, BMI comes from a very, very racist origin. It's designed by a eugenicist for the purpose of eugenics. So already we have racism. We've excluded all women. We've excluded all non-white European people from this table. In fact, when I said they did the tables, you remember I said they turned the height weight tables into BMIs. To begin with, they did it for men and women without having statistics about women because women were never measured.
Oh, that just clicked for me.
What they did was they just made it slightly lower for women. They were just like, well, if a man's normal BMI is 26, we'll just make 25 normal for women. I honestly swear to you that's how it went. But my point is, women, all ethnic and racial minorities, and everybody else has been completely and utterly excluded from any of this evidence. So that's problematic. It was never designed to be an individual assessment, so that's problematic. All of the research we have is now founded on body mass index, even though it's inaccurate, so that's problematic. And also, if you look at the research, it will, read a paper, it will just go something generic like, being fat is bad for your health, or the equivalent of. Like, they just say that as if they know that for a fact. And I keep saying, prove it. That's very problematic. All of it is problematic. But anything you do to try and change how we measure health, measuring health is not appropriate. We should not be measuring health at all. It's okay to measure a person's blood pressure and say, you have high blood pressure. And if you continue to have high blood pressure, the evidence suggests that you are at a higher risk of having a stroke or a heart attack. That is fine. But it doesn't have anything to do with health. I'm not going to look at your blood pressure and go, you're unhealthy. No, you just have high blood pressure. And that is, I think, also where we fall into this massive trap. Preventative medicine has become an obsession of 21st century medicine. And once upon a time, we were curing illnesses. Now we're trying to prevent them. Guess what? We can't. Not really. Even if we put you on all of these medications, we're going to reduce your risk by a few percent, but it's not very impressive.
And also, everyone is going to get old. And that's age is one of the biggest predictors of disease. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, we can't present
It's
that.
ridiculous.
I know that,
It's absolutely
I know
ridiculous.
a lot of people are trying, but
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, we could do an entire episode on, I think, the wellness culture and
we probably will.
We will.
Yeah, I was going to say you should totally do that. I'd totally come
I
on.
think maybe we will. Yeah. Would you like to come back and talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We could do a whole hour on wellness culture. We have these really bizarre ideas about what constitutes good for your physical health and bad for your physical health, and most of them are absolute nonsense. Again, fueled by, in this case, weight loss culture and wellness culture, who are financially profiting. Insurance companies, drug companies, food and drink industry, everybody is financially profiting from this rhetoric and from body mass index. And it's interesting also to me, just one last thing about BMI, that the American Medical Association made a statement this year finally saying that BMI is racist and not a particularly, has a history of racism and is not particularly accurate way of measuring health. And everyone was like, woohoo, no, they did this so that weight loss injections can be given to people at lower BMIs. That's why they did it. It was the sole reason, in my personal opinion. So don't be jumping up and down and praising the American Medical Association. Terrible organization, if you ask me. Yes. That's just my lecture on BMI.
I believe we are.
I was going to say, I think I asked you for a we asked you for a lecture on the BMI. I mean, I think this leads us into.
I believe that was the exact question that we asked you.
We asked for a tangent on the BMI, so we got it. And yes,
I know that I don't want to talk about it too much because absolutely could be an entire episode, but you brought it up, so I feel like I have to ask. And given we have access to your wealth of knowledge, I feel I'd be foolish not to take this opportunity to ask. I know that you have strong feelings about this. So can you please tell me everything that is wrong with these stupid weight loss injections like Wegovy, the harm it's causing, not just to fat people and furthering an anti-fat bias, also on thin people, because won't someone please think of the fit of the thin people? But but
also recently children as well, apparently.
Children, and also the harm it's causing for people with diabetes and society as a whole. Just, again, please just dunk on them, please.
So let's talk about what the studies show. The studies are called the STEP studies, and I should know what I mean, because it's semaglutide treatment effectiveness. I don't know. STEP is the abbreviation, and I've forgotten what it stands for. But there are several. There was 8 originally, and then there's been a couple more. So let's briefly talk about what the STEP studies showed. The first STEP study showed that compared to taking a placebo, people lost more weight within a year than people who took the injections lost more weight within a year than people who took a placebo. Everybody had to be on a 500 calorie diet. They had to exercise 150 minutes a week, and they had to have monthly lifestyle coaching, or I can't remember exactly what they call it, but you know what I mean. It's usually someone.
Sorry, did I hear that correctly? 500 calories a day
deficit. Yeah.
Sorry, I was like, hold on.
No. 500 calorie deficit a day. Relax.
I was like, no wonder they lost weight, but also, what the fuck?
Actually, the study is really interesting if you think about it, because people were put on a 500 calorie deficit a day, so a definite energy deficit, and the deficit was worked out by how much because people can work out how many calories you need in a day just by measuring because we just assume that your body is a closed system, and we've never heard of gut biomy and all of that stuff. They worked out on day 1 how many calories you should consume. So people had to have that many calories, they had to exercise, and they had to have monthly meetings. And so the study showed 2 things. One, people who take semaglutide, Wegovy, lose much more weight than people who don't. To me, the most interesting thing was people who just go on a diet and have a placebo lose only 2.5% of their body weight. So you keep telling me it's all about calories in and calories out. 2.5%, mate. That's all that's happening. And that study was pretty rigorous. So there you go. That's proved that
hang on. So it's not that simple?
Apparently not. I know this is coming as a shock to many of you.
They're
So
showing their cards here. Oh no.
that's one of the things that I love about that study, actually, is I can look at it and go, actually, this is proof that dieting doesn't work, because these people were on a diet and it didn't work. Anyway, that was step one. What we did notice in step one was right at the end of step one, we began to see a slight increase in weight, but we didn't know much about that until we got to step five. Step five actually looked at people, exactly the same study, but this time over 2 years. And people stayed on the injections for 2 years. But what happened was, as at around the 1 year mark, people started to regain on the injections. In fact, they regained quite a significant amount of the weight that they lost in just a few months. If you were to follow the trajectory of that line and just follow it up until 5-10 years, what you will find is people will have regained all that weight within 5 years, which is what we tell people all the time. People who go on a diet will end up regaining most of that weight within 5 years.
And sometimes more.
Yeah, sometimes more, absolutely. So we don't know. But if we were to just follow that trajectory, that's what we'd find. This is not good science, by the way. Following the path of a line is not good science, but it's all we've got. Step 4 showed what happens when you're on this weight loss drug and then it gets taken away from you, because they basically swapped some people out from the drug to the placebo. And, still on the 500 calories, and all that stuff, still doing it. What they found was you will regain the weight almost instantaneously. The second you stop, you're going to regain the weight. There is no such thing as maintaining weight loss after these injections. The moment you stop them, you will regain everything. And chances are, and from what we've seen so far, you will end up heavier than when you first started. The rate of regain is unprecedented. We've never seen anyone gain weight back so quickly. In any weight loss drug under the sun that we've ever had before, this is the quickest we've ever seen it, that rate of regain. So what we have is a drug that, yes, will make you lose a lot of weight in a short period of time, about a year. Then you'll start regaining that weight. And if you were to stop it because, say, you run out of money, or the government says, or your NHS says you can only have it for 2 years, any of those things, you'll regain the weight straight away. Then there was the side effects. About 65% of people, a lot of them nausea, constipation, vomiting, headaches, dizziness. It's unpleasant. Then there were the risks, things like pancreatitis, which is a very serious risk. They excluded anybody with a history of pancreatitis. So, of course, that helped. But yeah, pancreatitis is very serious. Then there are the theoretical risks. And the theoretical risks are the one that bother me the most. So we do know that it's linked to a form of thyroid medullary cancer, which is a very rare form of cancer, but it is linked to that. We don't know if it's linked to any other cancers. It's not been around long enough. But here's what a lot of experts are saying. This medication is going to knacker your beta cells. It is pummeling the beta cells that exist within your healthy pancreas, right? Because you're not a diabetic when you go on this medication. This is a weight loss medication. We're not talking about diabetics. They weren't included in these studies. So this drug is pummeling a healthy pancreas. And beta cells are I would say, quite dramatic in of that. Like, the moment things go wrong, they get very offended. They're very like, oh gosh, it's too much. They're not sturdy. Beta cells can be quite overwhelmed very easily. So we don't know what's going to happen when we keep pummeling them, but we have an idea that possibly that could lead to early presentation of diabetes. We could be turning these people into diabetics early. And guess what happens when you become diabetic? You have to start on diabetic medications, and guess who makes diabetic medications? The same people who make the weight loss medications. So I'm not saying this was their evil plan all along. I'm not saying that. I wouldn't say that. I'm just presenting the facts. So here are some of the problems we have with the actual medication. And then when we take a step back, we look at the way that these drug companies behave. Novo Nordisk, they're so unethical. And this is all public knowledge. They have a history of not warning their patients about cancer. They were told, you must warn your patients who go, the people who go on this medication about cancer. There should be a warning, and they just refused to heed it. And so the FDA came back to them and said, you must change it, and they refused to change it. And now they've had to pay out some money, a small amount of money, but they knew that the amount of money that they would have to pay out to the FDA was less than the profit they would make from this medication. So they just didn't do it. So they don't care whether you get thyroid cancer. They don't care whether people are dying because they can't get their insulin. They have demonstrated that they don't care about this. They fund every single quote unquote obesity organization that exists in the world. Every single one is financially funded by Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, because Eli Lilly are the ones that produce Manjaro, which is a drug that I can never pronounce, and Novo Nordisk does Saxenda and Wegovy. Now let's talk about how it's impacting diabetics. 2 ways. People always talk about the one way. I want to talk about the 2 ways. Number 1, Ozempic, which is semaglutide 1 milligram, is not useful for weight loss. In fact, the step 2 study looked at it and found that semaglutide 1 milligram, in fact, I don't think step 2 looked at semaglutide 1 milligram, but the diabetic versions of this medication are not strong enough to produce enough weight loss. It has to be the strong doses, which is Wegovy. That's 2.4 milligrams. Ozempic is only 1 milligram. So people are giving out Ozempic because they can't get Wegovy, because no one can get it. Like, it doesn't exist because they're not manufacturing it quick enough. And they bought the manufacturing plant that used to manufacture OxyContin. They bought it from Purdue, which says everything. They're doing deals with Purdue. I mean, just
what a cursed association!
Yeah,
oh my goodness.
There you go. Says everything. So yeah, all of this stuff is just going on in the background, and the best people to talk to a bit about this are Reagan Chastain and Louise Adams of Australia, because they know much more than me. Everything I know, I've learned from them. I must say that. I must credit them when it comes to the ethics. I have done a little bit of my own research, but they know way more than I do. So this is a very, very unethical company. What's happening is doctors are prescribing Ozempic because they can't get hold of Wegovy. And diabetic patients who take Ozempic for their diabetes are not able to get their Wegovy. So now diabetic patients are having to be placed on other medications, some of which will have quite serious consequences. So like, for example, some people are having to be put on gliclazide. Gliclazide can cause hypos. Hypos can kill you. So this is really serious stuff now, because if we can't get Ozempic, we're going to stick you on gliclazide, and gliclazide might actually cause you to have a hypo and die, but sorry, we can't get Ozempic. That's problematic. The second thing that's problematic is that diabetics are being given Ozempic in preference to all other diabetic medications if they're fat. And again, they are a diabetic medication, but they are not the diabetic medication. And there are other diabetic medications out there that are just as good. Some would argue some have are known to be cardioprotective. They help with kidneys. They help with all sorts of things. So, for example, in my personal experience, I was offered, to pick between 2 of them, and I said, I know exactly which one I want. I don't want Ozempic. I want the other one because I've read the studies, and I personally think it's much better. But they would have given me Ozempic because Ozempic would make me lose more weight than the other drug, because that one doesn't lose weight. And God forbid, some medications such as insulin cause weight gain, and so they don't want you to have insulin because that will cause weight gain. But these
because
conversations,
that's what matters, right?
Right.
Out of the whole picture.
Yeah. So I have sat in an office, obviously it's embarrassing because I've treated diabetes as a GP. I've treated diabetes for many years. I was the diabetic lead for a while in a practice that I worked in. So I have experience of treating diabetic patients. So I have the knowledge, which is great, but most people don't, and they just do what they're being told. So if they're being told this is the medication you should take, you just, question, are you giving it to me because I'm fat? So this drug, the drug company, I mean, no drug company it can be trusted. No drug company can ever be trusted. Their shareholders will always come, their profits will always come above everything else. But the playbook that Novo Nordisk has been using is one that reminds me so much of Purdue and the OxyContin playbook. They're doing exactly the same things. I'm seeing the way that they're behaving, and I'm like, this is very familiar. Like, I actually watched this on TV not that long ago.
Yeah, I watched the documentary a month ago.
I've watched the documentary. I've read the books. Yeah. I get it. I've seen this before. You just looked at it and I honestly think they looked at it and went, that's a good idea. Let's do that. That's how it feels sometimes. Now, I am very, very vocally anti Novo Nordisk, and I'm waiting for them to pick me up on it. I have said to colleagues of mine who are also very outspoken, I was like, has anyone ever approached you or said anything? And they've said no. And I think that's because we're small fry. Like, we're not that important, and they don't care about us. They don't think that we're going to do any damage. But yeah. I am well aware that if this message were to get out and it would have a problem, if they would have problems with their profit margin, all of a sudden you will see that all of a sudden I will disappear off the face of the planet, and you'll know why.
Absolutely. I kind of thought about that in a sense when you were talking about when you were explaining you were in that room and the head of the medical board or something was, we have a problem with racism, and you're kind of like, well, what are we doing about it? And nobody else around you is speaking out. Well, that's kind of why, right? Because your entire career could just be destroyed and worse.
Well, and if I could speak to that, my career is in the process of being destroyed. I am currently, so I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to speak about this because I've never received any legal advice, in the sense that I have not. Nobody knows. I could get punished for it. I don't care at this stage. I don't know what the worst could happen. But I received notice of 2 complaints that were made about me. One was an eating disorder organisation in the UK that many of you will be familiar with. Who have a very worrying practice of talking about obesity, and I must use that word very carefully, obesity mindsets and things like that. When they're talking about eating disorder recovery, they actually do an entire module on obesity treatment, and they claim to be an eating disorder expert because they say we've heard of them. So I've stood up against them publicly, and then there's another organisation of bariatric dietitians who claim to be experts in medical weight stigma and are absolutely kind of dominating the conversation here in the UK. And again, I have a problem with them because A, they're all thin and white, and B, they're all bariatric dietitians. And so I think they're somewhat biased as well. I've spoken out against them now. They often and always, anyone I ever speak out against threatens my GMC license. Right, I'm going to report you to the GMC. And I'm always like, my response is, my GMC number is 6077567, and here's the email to report me, because I will not be right. I will not be deterred from speaking my truth because you're threatening my career. But they did, of course. They reported me. Lots of people report me, but these 2 reported me, and they managed to get somewhere. One individual in particular has a real issue with the fact that I'm transgender, and it's very clear in the way that she has spoken about me in her letters of complaint. So what did happen was the GMC received these letters. The first person to look at them, the registrar, looked at the complaints and dismissed them. And then she said, that's not acceptable. I want you to look at it again. And the second registrar that looked at it decided that they were going to, they had to decide whether or not to investigate me. So they weren't investigating me. They were investigating whether to investigate me under the rule 12 of GMC.
How much time do they have?
This has taken over almost 2 years. Yeah, it's been a really long time. And so I received a letter, and in that letter, this woman had complained that I was not safe for cisgender people because of my views about cisgender people, and I was not safe for white patients because of my views about white people, in particular that I'm racist. I have a document from the GMC, a letter that claims that I am racist because of my views towards white people, and I discriminate against cisgender people. I have a document from the GMC, and my response was, I wrote a complaint, and I said to them, in 2019, I sat down in an office with, the responsible officer for the GMC. At the time, I was an appraiser for other GPs. I had quite an important role within the kind of medical appraisal community. That was the meeting I was sat in 2019, and you assured me that there was a racism problem in the GMC and that you were going to do something about it. And one of the biggest problems with racism in the GMC is that you are investigating Black and brown people twice at the rate of twice as much as white people. So you assured me that this was an issue, that you've picked up on it, and that you're going to do something about it. And 3 years later, there is a registrar, the person responsible for deciding whether or not I should be investigated, is telling me that I am racist towards white people because of the words that I use and because I call out strict structures of white supremacy and structures and systems of white supremacy. That is what they accuse me of. And I said to them, this is a you problem and not a me problem. I know that I'm right. I know where I stand. I have read the books. I am aware of the literature. If you think that it's possible to be a racist because I stand up against the fact that people with marginalized identities are being harmed by society, then that's a you problem and not a me problem. But that was the position of the GMC. I have a letter proving it. And one day, when I know that I legally can, I will publish that for the world to see, because the world needs to understand that the organization that holds my license to practice in its hand and is currently investigating me and has the right to remove my license to practice, not that I'm going to use it anymore anyway, but they have the right. They are fucking with my right to work. I haven't been able to work for over a year now because one woman, one vocally transphobic woman, put in a complaint about me and said I was unsafe for thin people, for white people, and for cisgender people, and that I'm a bully and that I've been harassing her. And because of that, my license hangs in the balance. And so I think it's really important to understand that these systems are harming the people who dare to speak out about it. So yeah, sure, they absolutely are trying to take my license of practice away. I cannot work as a doctor. I have not been able to even get onto the board in order to have a practitioner number in order to work. They have taken my right to work away from me, and it's fine because I found something else to do, and I am very happy with what I'm doing. But nobody should have the right to do that to me.
But it's still, yeah.
It's unacceptable.
And it is basically a very accurate depiction of the problem with power.
Yes. Yeah. It's only
it explains it in a nutshell.
Yeah. A few people in positions of power who have, now, to be fair, the GMC have not ruled, and I want to make that very clear. If they do rule against me, then I will be extremely vocal. They haven't ruled. But my professionalism has not been called into question because I harm patients. I have a stellar record. I've never harmed a patient significantly. I have not had any issues with my fitness to practice. This is one woman or two groups of people, but essentially one transphobic woman who has referred to me in so many ways. And there is proof. I have documented proof that she is happy that we've got her, and that's what she says about me. We've got her.
Oh my God. Yeah, I was going to say, add the extra layer there. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, this is the systems of power that are in place. And I think that's why I love, every time people like yourselves invite me to come on a podcast, I'm just like, you're resisting. You are pushing back against the mainstream narrative. And to me, that resistance, the louder it gets, the more powerful it gets, is going to enforce change. It always does. We just got to keep resisting.
And I think if we think of the term, is this UK's most dangerous doctor? And, we have doctors who are literally killing people. We have doctors that are harming people in many different ways, not just medically. We have doctors that are prescribing diabetic medication for weight loss and all of these, impacts that has. But you are deemed to be the UK's most dangerous doctor because you haven't done that stuff?
Well, no, because I am dangerous. I'm dangerous in the same way that you're dangerous. I'm dangerous because when we stand up to the mainstream, when we stand up and we say these systems that are in place right now are not okay, that's dangerous. That's really dangerous. And that's why I wear that badge with honor. I will say that social media is not the best place to have a nuanced conversation.
Oh no.
And I will say that my approach to social media is to be as controversial as possible, because otherwise people don't hear it, right? They only want to hear the really controversial stuff. That's how social media works. So I've leaned into that controversy sometimes. I'm not ashamed of it. I will continue to do so because that's how I get the message.
Challenges people. Yeah.
But when it comes to the facts, I am secure in the facts, the evidence. I have done my due diligence and I have read the studies. I could sit down and wax lyrical about diabetes prevention because I've read the studies and I know what they show and I know the statistics like the back of my hand. And there are other people out there too. So sure, we may seem a bit unhinged and sometimes it may seem like we're walking around with like tinfoil hats and with all these conspiracy theories. That's fine. I don't mind being perceived that way. But ultimately, there is so much truth in the things that we're saying. There is factual evidence to back it up.
Yeah.
I know that you hold masterclasses and webinars on this topic, on this in particular your Take Your Power Back courses, and I definitely don't want you to give out this information for free, as people should absolutely engage with you if they wish to access this information. However, could you give us a little quick sample of some things that people can do when they go in to see their doctors and how they can advocate for themselves? And obviously, it's such a daunting thing because they're supposed to be the expert, but at the end of the day, everyone is the expert in their own body, and you know what doesn't feel right. So how can people show up for themselves?
I don't like gatekeeping this information for money, so I'm more than happy to share the information. It's just that, like, I could talk about it for days and days and days and still not get through it all. So snapshot, and I would encourage, I do try and share as much of this information as possible. I have created a website. It needs a lot of updating, but it's No Way, spelt weigh.org, where, the whole point of that website was to give people the resources that they needed to go to the doctor with. Mm-hmm. So that's all free. Go and access it, have a read through, but it needs updating, absolutely. I also have done there's a post on my website, like a blog post. It's under, like, if you go to my website and look under the latest, it's like 5 top tips that you can take with you to the doctor. So there is some information out there. If I can't get it all in this little podcast, but I think that there are certain things that that definitely help. One is taking an advocate. I would say that's near the top of my list. The second, practical tips: the way you dress like you're either going to the gym or you've just gotten out of a business meeting. Dress appropriately for the doctor's office. I know you might be thinking, gosh, that's a weird one to come up with, but it works. I'm talking about practical stuff here. The third thing, which I think is really important, is that at some point in time in the consultation, ideally at the beginning, if you can, but sometimes it just doesn't feel able. Sometimes you can do it before the consultation in writing, it's a shame you can't see me now, but I want you to put your hand up like a stop sign, as if you're stopping something, and you put your hand up and you repeat these words: I do not consent to being weighed, discussing my weight, or discussing weight loss in the consultation, whichever one applies. I do not consent to being weighed or discussing my weight in the consultation. Hand up in the air. And if the doctor's already started talking about it, because sometimes doctors just suddenly go into it, you can just say, put your hand up in the air. So I'm just going to stop you there. Hand up in the air. I do not consent. Please use those words specifically. I do not consent to. Not I don't want to. I don't know. No, I do not consent to. It's a very powerful word that should have an immediate action. And if the doctor doesn't stop, which they should straight away, but if they don't, you keep your hand up in the air and say, no, I have said I do not consent. Just keep saying, I do not consent, I do not consent, I do not consent. It may feel like a scary thing to do, but it's actually a massively empowering thing to do, because the moment you say that, the doctor is on the back foot. If they try to do something to you whilst you've withdrawn your consent, you can then say, I'd like you to document in my notes that I withdrew my consent and you still did this. And then you can get up and you can say, I am now going to make a formal complaint, because that's bad what they just did. Very bad. We take these things very seriously. So I think that is really important. Know the facts. The facts are that weight loss is unsustainable, that we have never been able to prove that weight loss improves your health outcomes in any meaningful way over the long term. In the first 3 to 6 months, sure, but 3 to 6 months is nothing. You're going to live decades, right? So in the long term, there is literally no evidence. There is evidence, however, that people who weight fluctuate, who weight cycle, end up with poorer health outcomes. This applies to insulin resistance, cholesterol, blood pressure, heart attacks, strokes, cancer. I could keep going. And the last thing that you have to know is that you cannot prevent a condition from happening by losing weight. Like, there's just no evidence. Diabetes is your classic one. If you lose weight, you will not reduce your risk of diabetes. There's just no evidence. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary. So you have to know these things. You have to be secure in the knowledge that these are the facts, so that if your doctor makes you a promise, like, oh, I see you've got, you've got a knee pain or back pain, lose some weight, it'll get better. Say, sure, show me the evidence. Prove it to me. and you want to say 5 years down the line that my knee will be better. I want you to bring me the evidence. The burden of proof should be on the doctor, not on you. Your job is not to be researching these things. Your doctor is paid to do that job. So the moment they make you a promise or they tell you something, just, yeah, sure, where's the evidence? Now, I don't want to encourage you to be having these conversations with doctors, because actually I find those are not particularly productive conversations. Just simply say, I do not consent to discussing this, full stop. There is literally nothing a doctor can say to you about weight or weight loss, or even like a doctor's version of nutrition advice. That is not to say that nutrition advice isn't helpful. It is. But a doctor's version, unless it's intuitive eating, unless it's weight inclusive, is not going to be helpful. So you just need to know that they don't know what they're talking about. And that part of that is just that security and knowledge that actually in this particular area, you don't know what you're talking about. If you're practicing from a weight normative standpoint, you don't know what you're talking about. You haven't read the evidence. You don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, those are the things. But really, honestly, the way you dress, and whether you bring an advocate for you is going to make all the difference about the way your doctor treats you in that moment. I can promise you that. And the other thing I do tell people, and I go into this in great detail, write everything down on a piece of paper beforehand. In particular, your ideas, your concerns, and your expectations. What are you worried about? What do you want to happen? Like, I want to be investigated. I want to have treatment. I want this. I want that. And remember who's in charge. I know doctors make you think that they're in charge.
They're working
but
for
they are
you.
literally paid. They are paid to do this service. Like, so even if you live in a country where there's a free healthcare, so it doesn't matter. The doctor is being paid to work for you. When you walk into that room, you walk with your head held high, and you know for a fact that you are in charge. And I think that it might not be everything, but that's important.
Absolutely. It's just so like barbaric that somebody has to think about what they are going to wear to go see their doctor so that they can be treated with respect.
Yeah, but it works. It's barbaric, but it works. And
you just got to game the system, right? You just got to.
You do actually. Do you know? It's interesting because I was just running. I'm running Take Your Bioback at the moment, and on Wednesday we were talking, and I was talking about a bunch of stuff, and I said, when it comes to actual life, I don't condone lying, manipulating, misleading, none of those things. But in the doctor's office, if that's what it takes to get what you need, do it. Yeah. Just do it, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
One of the things I always say to people is take a bottle of water into the doctor's office, especially if you're alone, because when it gets too much, I want you to simply pick up that bottle of water, uncap it, take a sip, recap it, and put it down. That gives you the 30 seconds you need to reset, because I know
grounding technique.
Your body is absolutely on high alert. You are, the amount of noradrenaline and adrenaline firing in your body in that moment is intense. So ground yourself with a bottle of water, and no doctor is going to interrupt you having a bottle of water. And also, if you write things down beforehand, just read it off. Like, you do not need to memorize it. This is not an audition for a play. Read it from the paper. Just read it out loud. Don't make eye contact and just read everything, because ultimately you need to get that information out there. Don't be afraid to interrupt. All of those things, like polite conversation. Do the opposite of polite conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, you think of like trauma as well, and that's like a trauma technique, how to like grounding, like you said, Ash, also anchoring, and like it's such a valid, incredible 100%. Tool to have. Absolutely.
The course that I have created called Take Your Bioback is focused predominantly on trauma, and the techniques that I teach come from what I've learned about how to manage trauma.
Amazing. Yeah. You're singing to me. That's like just told. It just reminded me so much of this. I was told, have you tried, the classic, have you tried mindfulness?
No.
And I remember looking at him and just saying, have you ever tried to go fuck yourself?
Amazing.
Yes! And then,
that's epic.
I then was asked at because it was, it's part of my treating team. I was asked at a further, a few days later, do you think you might have some anger problems?
Yes,
that's
I do. Yeah, And what's the root cause of that problem? Let me ask you.
I just want to fucking sleep.
Exactly.
Oh.
And again, it's funny because when you bring that up, you talk about sleep. That's a classic conversation I've had with people, and the amount of people that will come into my office and just, they'll say, I'm really struggling to sleep. And they know what their body needs. They know that mindfulness isn't, because they've tried it, damn it. They're not fools. They've done their research.
Download the Calm app. Just practice.
Yeah,
It's like,
but
no.
No, but this is it. Like, as a doctor, I am able to discern. I am smart enough, and I've done this job long enough to discern who is coming to me who hasn't tried all of these things, who perhaps is getting into poor sleep hygiene and stuff like that, compared to some people that have a really bloody good reason why they are not sleeping, and it might be to do with neurodivergence or all. I am smart enough to ascertain who I'm dealing with, and therefore, I don't need to recommend the Calm app to somebody who clearly is beyond that. They've come in and they've said, I need drugs to help me to sleep. This is the only solution for me. And so I know that there are drugs that are harmful. I know that if I just prescribe you a sleeping tablet that potentially could be addicted, I can have that conversation with you. We can have that discussion. But ultimately, why would I deny you the right to sleep?
Absolutely.
We all know that sleep...
You weigh up the benefits and the harms, right? But them not sleeping is actually going to cause more harm to them than if I prescribe this.
Ash.
Oh, sorry. Oh.
No, I know, right. I mean, it's not like you should do like informed consent or anything, like,
right.
Risks and benefits. Come on now. Don't take it too seriously. But this is the problem, because we want quick and easy. We want to be able to say, Calm app, off you go. That's not fixing anything.
Absolutely.
I've had the conversation about sleeping tablets is not an easy one to have, because we are going to have to talk about risks and benefits. We're going to have to talk about addiction. We're going to have to navigate and negotiate. Okay, so how long do you want to be on them for? At what point in time do we have to sit back? Yeah. So I will often come up with a plan, and that will include a follow-up, say after 2 weeks. It's going to take me longer to do that than it is to say, off you go and try the Calm app. And I get it. Sometimes I'm exhausted, and sometimes I only have 10 minutes, and 10 minutes isn't enough. So that's not my fault. That's the systems and structures that are in place. I could really want to help you, but also I need to eat and I need to be able to pee. And those are two things that I am very rarely able to do when I'm working a full day in general practice. I actually don't get to eat, and I don't get to pee until about 3:00 in the afternoon. That's how busy my day is. It's reasonable to feel that way as a human being, but also, why are my patients being punished for it? Like, it's an impossible situation, and the impossible situation is the problem. And that's the thing that we have to call out, rather than saying all doctors are evil, which they're not, although some of them are absolute fuck faces. But some are fine. But it's a fucked up system, and I'm a true believer in burn it down and start again. I know that that's not practical, but I don't see I don't see a solution. I don't see how we can possibly fix what's going on right now. It was founded on eugenics. Medicine was founded on racism. It was founded on eugenics. It was founded on patriarchy. It was founded on Christian nationalism, modern medicine in the global north, or whatever, the west, or whatever you want to call it. It's not the foundations are they're stinking and they're rotten. And when you have rotten, stinking foundations, sometimes the only thing that you can do is just wipe it out and start again, right? Bit it. What else can we do? Yeah. So people who are listening to this, I want them to start paying attention to the fact that actually the system, not the doctor individually, but the system is fucked, and there is no real short-term solution.
And it's not their fault, 100%.
No.
I love that you just segued into something that it wasn't written down, but I had taken mental notes, which was, if you are a medical practitioner or a doctor, well, a medical practitioner, doctors, you know what I mean, or someone who has worked in the medical field or something like that, because I know there are certain people listening who might be thinking, well, fuck, this stuff like this is really confronting to hear, right? Of maybe everything that you've been taught is kind of not great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and your profession is wrong. Look, I work in advertising, so I know that capitalism, I work under that umbrella. I'm basically doing a lot of evil. So I know that it's up to the individuals, I think, to be aware of what they're doing, how they're contributing, and also analyzing themselves of how they can be better, and maybe thinking, what if I'm wrong? And engaging with people like yourself, Asher, and trying to unpack maybe the systemic racism that is built into the medical system, and following people like Aubrey Gordon, listening to other podcasts, following people like Stephanie Uboa, reading books like Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings, and actually doing those things and doing the work. Take the Fat Positive Framework course by Nick McDermott. Like, actually do the work in seeing what else is out there and being a better practitioner, being a better doctor, and being a better person who can make a real difference in their patients' lives, which is why a lot of these people got into medicine in the first place.
Right. And to speak to that, if I may, I know that I've been going on for ages now, but
please, yes. Again, I mean, like, not being a doctor, but like, this is what you doctors need to do. Like, no, I'm not saying that.
No,
yes.
no. To speak to that, it's interesting because I am now in a place where I have given up full-time medicine. As I said, I can't work. So I have to find another way to make money. And everybody needs to make money. We all deserve to make money and to pay our bills. Someone said something so profound to me the other day. What they explained to me when it came to money and making money and charging people for my services, they were like, you can still have values that you stand by, working under a capitalist system, but still have values. In the same vein, if you're a healthcare professional or allied healthcare professional, you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, fuck, the system's broken, but I still work in the system and I still need the system to pay my bills. But if you're listening and you're like, well, what do I do? It's an impossible situation. I would encourage you to sit down and write down your values. Write down the values that you've been taught. Write them down and say, this is the doctor that I'm going to be, or this is the nurse that I'm going to be. And I am going to challenge each of the things that are happening to me at work, but in a way that allows me to continue working. I want to be able to spend half an hour to an hour with each of my patients. It is not physically possible for me to do that. So that can't be one of my values. But perhaps one of my values could be that I don't turn somebody away without saying, I can't do all of this in the 10 minutes that we've got, but I'm going to bring you back. That could be one of my values, right? Or I'm going to signpost you to someone that can help you. So that's what I would encourage you to do. Don't just go, well, this is life, so there's nothing I can do about it. There is something you can do about it,
So
but
much
you
you
should
can do about it.
If you're listening to this right now, don't be like, oh, that's it, I quit. Don't be like, I'm never going to charge anybody for my services. No, you can't live that way. The capitalism exists and we live in capitalism. But you can say, all right, well, here's my values and this is how I'm going to practice. And that, I think, can be a really helpful thing to do if you are a professional who just doesn't know what to do next, is so overwhelmed by all this information. They listen to me and they just go, well, even if I agree with you, what the fuck does that mean?
What do I do now?
There are things you can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also listen to your patients, ask for feedback, and when they tell you, believe them.
Oh, believing patients. That should be your number one value.
Really getting radical now. Come on.
No,
am I the most outrageous podcaster?
You are. I mean, how dare you? But yeah, believing patients should be top of your list. I believe what my patients tell me. Just a bit of kindness, or like believing someone and saying, I believe you. Sometimes a doctor can just say, I hear you, I believe you, I wish I could help you, but I'm afraid I'm stuck. And that isn't going to fix things, but that changes everything when it comes to how a patient feels. They're like, this doctor is on my side. This doctor cares about me. This doctor wants to do something for me. And sometimes just say, look, I genuinely don't know. I'm really sorry. I wish I did, but I don't know. Again, they're like, oh, human being, not perfect.
Right?
That's
like
okay.
you're not expected to know everything.
Exactly.
Nobody
but
can.
We're not taught this.
Yeah.
We're not taught this. Maybe there needs to be, maybe that's something I need to do. Like, just write a list of things that doctors need to learn how to say. Repeat after me. I believe you.
Now, as much as I don't want to, I might have to wrap us up. Look, I know that this has been a very hard time for you in particular at the moment, Asher, because at the time we're recording this, there is great political turmoil at the moment. And you've been very vocal about that on your Instagram, and I very much appreciate it. I'm learning a lot from your content.
Oh, thank you.
The question I have is, what is bringing you the most joy right now?
Oh, so many things. My So Hamza Youssef, who is the head of the Scottish National Party, of which I am a member, bloody killed it in an interview yesterday. He opened his mouth and I was like, you absolute legend.
Amazing.
Celtic fans all had Palestinian flags at a Celtic match. I was like, so proud to be Scottish right now. I know I'm technically a settler. I'm a settler colonialist of Scotland. I do not belong here. I was born south of the border, but they've welcomed me with open arms, and I just extremely proud. I am, devastated about obviously what's going on in the world, but also have made a lot of connections with people that I probably wouldn't have made connections with had this not happened. I'm grateful for those people. I'm grateful for the people in my life. I'm grateful for people like you. My favorite thing is to meet people. Like it's to form connections with people. It brings me joy. And so I got a lot of things that I'm really happy about right now. And actually being the fat doctor, I know this sounds silly, but when I came up with the name, I called myself the fat doctor because in my head I was going to become thin and it was going to be ironic. And it's genuinely true. I was going to be a fat doctor that became thin and would be able to sell weight loss, and that was the plan I had for my life. But now when I think about it, and I think about the fact that those two identities, being fat, being a doctor, have put me in this quite unique position where I am able to speak into people's lives, and it's a huge privilege, which I do not take for granted in any way. So everything I'm doing right now, I genuinely enjoy. And even when it comes with hate, even when I'm called names, even when I'm subject to kind of like loads of transphobia and at the moment I'm being called a self-hating Jew, and before that I was being called a she-brew, and people say all sorts of awful things, and it's horrible. But you know what? Even that brings me some kind of slightly sick pleasure because I know that I'm on the right side of history. And knowing 100%. That you're on the right side of history can sometimes feel like in of itself can be, is a joy. So I'm not altruistic. I'm not just doing this for other people. I'm doing it for myself as well. I'm loving my new career, but it genuinely brings me joy to be involved in the space. I get up every morning. I'm like, what am I going to do today? Which is really great. So yeah, so much joy.
Oh, my face is hurting from smiling so much.
Like I was like,
honestly,
I kept trying to like support in my cheeks.
Thank you so much, Asher. I think I've pretty much explained how important having you on has been, but also how much fun that you've made this episode. And this has been such a dream, and we need 10,000 more activists like you in this space. And honestly, I feel like we didn't have many people like this 10 years ago. Or we probably did, but they just weren't being amplified, and their voices were just completely not, just completely shut out.
They were laying the groundwork.
They were absolutely laying the groundwork, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm just so glad that all of these voices are coming out in the open now, and people are taking their power back, and people finding their voices, and we just need more of it. I think people should absolutely not be afraid to do so, even when the GMC comes for you. So
yeah. Oh God.
You can follow Dr. Asher Larmie on Instagram @thefatdoctor, or visit their website www.fatdoctor.co.uk. There you can find more information on Asher, masterclasses, webinars for fat folks practitioners, and all folk alike, books. You can find training, recommendations, news, all of it. Just go there.
Just go visit it.
Everything's there.
Just go to the website. What do you like? I hope you're doing that right now.
My website traffic. Thanks you so much. Thank you so much for that.
And you have a podcast, correct?
I mean, I'm not like you. You're also organized. I really need to get back into it. It's one of the many things that I want to do, and I have a 3 series of it or whatever. But I will get back to it. In the meantime, I'm trying to find ways to create community, both with fat people who are interested in having. So I'm calling it the waiting room. But
I like that. Yeah.
I love it.
And I just want that kind of community where we're with each other. The idea being that when you're sat in the waiting room, you can have these conversations with each other, but also every so often you get invited to see the doctor. The fat doctor will see you now. And so I will be doing like kind of monthly events and kind of, I want to be able to have that kind of community, but I also equally and at the same time want a community of health professionals and allied professionals and people who are doing this work to be able to bring us together as well. And I know these already exist, but people who are interested in learning, again, from a doctor. So that's one of my biggest passion projects, and also getting the No Way campaign off the ground. And in order to do that, I need to make enough money. So it's all in it's all happening. But if you can support me, and if you, not for, I'm offering you stuff. There's stuff you can buy that you hopefully will find useful. And in doing so, you're not only just kind of getting the stuff, but also it will support me to keep going. And I see
we need
loads
you to
of
keep
amazing
going.
things happening.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we do. We really do.
Oh, I don't even want to say goodbye. I can't do it. But that's all for today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you had as much fun as we did. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss a single episode. And please leave us a rating or a review. It really helps with the pod and analytics and making sure that we can get all of this out to more people. You can follow us on Instagram at pavedwithgoldpod, send us an email at pavedwithgoldpod@gmail.com, or visit our website, pavedwithgoldpodcast.com. All of those links will be in the show notes, along with all the ways that you can find Asher, along with extra resources, as per usual. And until next time, stay safe, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
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 This podcast is general in nature and has not taken your personal circumstances or medical history into account. We are here to share our own experiences and the things that we have found helpful throughout our own personal recovery journeys. Please remember that each person's journey and circumstances are different, and not all of the information contained in this podcast may be relatable to you. It's important you consult your own GP or recovery team to seek out tailored advice before making any important decisions relating to your own health and recovery process. If you have found any of the content in this episode distressing, please contact your care team or a medical professional. If you or someone you know is in crisis and needs help now, please contact emergency services in your region immediately.